Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to spring. Welcome to this week's IMA weekly show. I am Dr. Ryan Cole, head of Medical and Scientific Affairs at the Independent Medical Alliance. And tonight we're examining a serious, complex issue, the evidence surrounding China's organ harvesting industry and the broader ethical and human rights questions that it does raise. And joining me tonight is Jan Jekielek, senior editor with the Epoch Times, host of American Thought Leaders, and author of the newly published book, Killed to Order. And in this book, Jan investigates the available evidence, the institutional structures involved, the longstanding questions of how a system like this could operate for so long without a more direct international response. And I'm used to being on the other side of the interview, so I'm tickled tonight to have Jan joining me tonight. Jan, thank you so much for being here. I know you're super busy on book tour right now.
It's an incredible honor to be here with you, Ryan. And I said, I think in a post recently, I'm a little bit intimidated because you seem to know everything about everything. But let's see what happens.
Well, that's very kind. No need for that. You're just a genuine. Those of you that don't know Jan, Jan is just an incredible human and just a really deep thinker. And that's what I appreciate. All the interactions I've been blessed to have with Jan over these years. And before we dive into the book, I think that'd be a good way to start. I think how you came to the place you are now is fascinating. And I was privileged to be at your book launch at the Kennedy Center last week, and I like how you kind of told your backstory. So let's start with that, and then we'll dive into the book.
I was thrilled that you were there, and of course, you can't really see because the lights are so bright. But I recognized the voice instantly, and you had a great question. I remember too. Um, wow, the road to get here. So you want me to start from the beginning?
Yeah. I mean, the backstory of your kind of your history in the biological sciences, your health journey, and then kind of how it led you into, this amazing journalism that you do now, as well as authoring.
Yeah, so I spent 10 years studying, ultimately it was evolutionary biology. Of course, I just started with basic biology, but what it kind of evolved into, so to speak. And I was always a bit skeptical of mainstream narratives. This is what I look back in my life. It's kind of funny, but at about third year, and I'll just mention this because it's interesting. In third year university, I had I was at the University of Alberta. An undergrad, I was at the University of British Columbia, and then I went to the University of Alberta. But in third year, I understood basically that evolution by natural selection doesn't explain the diversity of life, and certainly doesn't explain the origin of life, and certainly doesn't explain, humans' role in the world or any of this stuff. And it should be clear to everyone, right? And I found it so bizarre that so many people did believe that evolution by natural selection was the answer, when clearly there's other mechanisms at play, and they're very interesting, right? A whole lot. And it certainly wasn't evolution by natural selection, but it was almost like a quasi-religious belief. I even talked about this with some of my professors. I remember like Dolph Schluter, who's like he's a guy who actually demonstrated incipient, the beginnings of an evolutionary process in these big lakes he built at UBC and so forth. But anyway, my point is that I ended up studying a different kind of evolution, which was there were two species of lemur that were mixing, and I got very interested in that. It looked like they might be mixing. And I thought, wow, that's cool. Let's study the genetics of these things, two totally different chromosome numbers. How is that even possible? Let's explore that. So that was that. I went to University of Alberta, where there's a great genetics lab, and that's what I was doing. And anyway, it turned out they were mixing, actually. There were these hybrids, and I was studying them, and I did the genetics around them. But on my last trip back from Madagascar, I got, it wasn't on the trip, but as I arrived, right? And I started getting kind of more and more ill. And in the process, I learned that I had something called Guillain-Barré syndrome. And anyone in the medical profession basically is aware of Guillain-Barré. It's a kind of a pretty rare autoimmune disorder. For those that might not know, Your immune system goes haywire, attacks your peripheral nervous system. I think it was even listed on the J&J vaccine as one of the side effects, potential side effects.
Yes.
So it manifests in different ways. I don't actually think it had anything to do with the vaccine, although some people disagree with me on that. But anyway, I had this, and it basically killed my career. I started losing control in my limbs and my fingers, and I didn't have it in this way. Some people stop breathing, right? I didn't have
Right.
it that bad. I had it bad enough that I couldn't do this kind of fine work, pipetting and so forth. Ryan knows a lot about
Oh,
pipetting.
yes.
I know you do, and I just couldn't do that anymore. And I still tried teaching a bit, but even that I was kind of just sluggish, and everything wasn't working well. And so, I lost my career, and I was trying to figure out what to do. And I met a guy who had chronic fatigue syndrome. Checked in with him, and he basically said, "Look, I tried this Chinese meditation. You should try it." And so that's how I got introduced to Falun Gong, and I didn't really know what it was. I got it on a grainy DVD. We called them VCDs back in the day, and I just mimicked on a computer these exercises, and it made me feel a little better for the first time as I just started doing this. So I just kept doing it, and basically within about 2 months, that's when I had my stat neurologist appointment. I had to deal with them. I checked myself out of the hospital. I'm a self-aware patient. I don't need to be here. If things start going wrong, you can bring me back, right? But right now, I can function enough to not be here and waste a hospital bed. But I just never needed to do that because when I saw her, my neurologist, basically, she told me, "You're in complete remission. Congratulations." Keep doing what you're doing. Literally, this is what she told me. And the funny part is, again, for medical practitioners, you'll be familiar with this thing. She never asked me why, like what it was that I was doing,
Oh,
right?
fascinating.
It's kind of odd, but apparently common when the thing that helps you isn't kind of on the menu, or the things that are supposed to be able to help you. And with Guillain-Barré, there is no treatment, right? But
Right.
not in, like, there's sort of acute, in these very extreme cases, they'll do plasmapheresis and things like
Right.
that. But anyway, so now, and I mean, for me, the whole thing was unbelievable. And I had in what people tend to do in these situations of crisis, especially when they're agnostic, like when I was, you're kind of like, God, on the off chance that you're up there, maybe it would be nice to get out of this. And I promised I would dedicate my life to service if indeed there was an answer. And this was, I mean, it was an answer, really, like in a kind of an unexpected, amazing way. And I kind of felt like I had to deliver on that. And I did that in all sorts of different ways. I started running international youth programs. Anyway, many things. But one of the things was I started learning about China and what was happening to Falun Gong practitioners in China. And it really hit me when this mother of a woman who was a postdoc at the University of Alberta, she was basically, she had come from China. She had escaped from one of these, I think it was a labor camp, or it might have been a prison. They have a very large incarceration system there. And and she had been tortured. And I was like, "Well, why did they torture you?" And she said, "Well, because I didn't sign this piece of paper." And the piece of paper was basically said, "Well, I renounce Falun Gong, and I'll be loyal to the Communist Party." I don't remember exactly, but this was the gist of it. And I'm going to help re-educate other people. And I'll explain how this fits in a moment. But this kind of blew my mind, right? Because we kind of imagine as human beings that if someone is in jail or doing something, or even being tortured, that they've done something wrong. They've done something to deserve it, even if the punishment might be greater than is acceptable, right? But what dawned on me as this woman was telling me her story, first of all, she's just like this, another person, right? And her crime was refusing to sign the piece of paper, right? So it's like that is there's no justice in this. It hit me. I was just thinking like this, and it just blew, like this. It shot through me that this is communism. This is, my parents had fled this in the 70s, right? I grew up in Canada, and I just didn't fully grasp it, but I knew about it. I knew it was bad. I learned that, right? It wasn't, but I just didn't fully understand how it works, because in a free society, it's very difficult to understand a totalitarian society from the vantage point of a free society, because there's a level of control and a desire for control of your mind that isn't a pressure that just doesn't exist. And I got it, and I thought, okay, this has to be part of my service. I'm going to help these people somehow. I'm going to help stop them at least being persecuted, right? Uh, I'll do what I can, right? This is the
Sure.
project. It was a daunting, obviously, right? Because by the way, at this time, part of what's really important is, right, and I think it fits to just jump right into this, right? But in communist societies, especially in communist China, they control, it's totalitarian. That what that means is that they really control all aspects of the society in a very specific way. And they innovated that. I write about this in my book a bit. They innovated about how they do that a bit, that allows for a bit of freedom around how you actually implement the communist directives. Okay, but they make sure that that's what you're doing. Okay.
Right.
So this was
And you tie that very well. I mean, I finished the book and, for those who haven't read it, obviously I encourage you to do so. But Jan, you do such a good job of weaving in the structure of the society versus the party and the geopolitics of it all. So keep going.
Yeah. And so the propaganda aspect, right? This is incredibly important to these societies. That's part of the control system. So they have the ability to push, they control and the entirety of the media, so media ecosystem, right? Propaganda used to be, actually, Xinhua News Agency used to be called a propaganda agency. They changed it because it sounded better in English to say new media, right? But basically they the only thing that goes out into the system in terms of information officially is uh, material that's meant to change your thinking, to shape
Hmm.
your thinking, right? As opposed to just provide information or something like that. And it's a massive system, and they control all of it. And they target different groups throughout history. At the beginning, it was the landowners that they targeted, right? In 1989, it was the students that they targeted. They had to,
Right.
convince people that this, whoever it is, that they need to attack or make a black class. They call it, making it a black class. People have to hate those people, right? And
Right.
that kind of activates this quirk in our psychology that allows us to at least do nothing as horrible things are done to that group, or even participate in doing horrible things to that group. It's like it's either they're dangerous, or they're less than us, they're not as good as we are. There's different constructions that are used, but it's pushed massively, and this affects people. And those are familiar with like COVID years, well, this will sound eerily familiar. Okay, unfortunately, I wish it wasn't, but unfortunately, like we've unfortunately learned some pretty terrible things from communist China, especially around the deployment of propaganda, and that it actually is effective on some
Right.
people, right? But that's a critical part on how you get this forced organ harvesting industry. You need that part. It's very important. So this is what they did to the Falun Gong prior to June 20th of 1999. Largely, Falun Gong practitioners are seen as, kind of normal pillars of society. And in some ways, they're practicing truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Actually, another translation, which I just kind of in the last few weeks I remembered, is they're trying to be true, good, and endure. That's the kind of core of what you're doing. It's very grassroots, very bottom up in a way that's almost difficult to explain even in Western society, where we're used to some kind of hierarchy. There is no hierarchy in Falun Gong. There's teachings by a master or a teacher. Li Hongzhi is his name. But there's no worship. In fact, you're not allowed to. That would be one of the few rules that are in there. There's no hierarchy. There's no even like joining something. There's no roster. Like living those teachings is what makes you a Falun Gong practitioner. There's no membership or something like that. And it's basically spread by word of mouth. And in the 90s, it grew from just a handful of people doing it to 70 to 100 million by government census, right? And so this is 1 in 13 Chinese are doing this. They're kind of being, they don't drink, don't smoke, also a kind of unusually healthy lifestyle, health benefits like what I experienced, right? So that's what was happening. 1 in 13 Chinese were doing this. The dictator at the time didn't like it. Jiang Zemin was his name. He said, we're going to eradicate this. Okay. And that's when that massive media ecosystem roared into production, demonizing these people with talking points straight out of Germany in the 30s, right? It's like very similar type of language, right? Make people fear them, don't go near them, don't be a part of it, denounce them if you can, right? It's a struggle It's a system where you create a group, you deem a group to be the black class, and then the rest of society is expected to struggle against them.
Hmm. That
And
goes back to the Maoist indoctrination and the struggle sessions, and
100%. There's even like a three body problem on Netflix. If you want to
yeah.
look it up, if you want to see a struggle session, it's an astonishingly good. The first episode, the first like 5 minutes or something, I honestly couldn't believe how amazing and a reenactment of a struggle session that was. But the guy ultimately gets killed. Why does he get killed? Because he won't say the sky is green, or I forget what they're demanding that he say. He's a scientist, and he won't give in to their demand to denounce truth, basically. And the daughter is watching him, and she basically decides to become a nihilist as she sees her father gets killed and invites the aliens to kill everybody. It's a sci-fi series, okay, but that part is really, really accurate, actually, reality. So this part is there. The other thing they can do, they can incarcerate a massive group of people. They can, and they do, right? And with Falun Gong, it was a particularly difficult situation for them because these people didn't re-educate easily. They couldn't get broken, right? They didn't sign that piece of paper easily. In fact, they withstood a whole lot of torture. I wrote some reports around this. I started very early on writing reports for the UN, and so for the stuff that I had to read and kind of put into UN speak, if you will, were just I don't like talking about it because it's horrifying. It's horrifying what they did to people to break them. But these people wouldn't break, and so they incarcerated 1 million or 2 million of them. And this is what sets up the whole kind of kill to order, the circumstances in which you could get a kill to order system. You need that. You need to have mass propaganda to dehumanize a large group of people, and you need to have the ability to incarcerate a huge amount, say 1 million or something. I mean, we don't know how many. It could be 2 million, right? This is all a state secret, but it has to be a very large group. So I've kind of transitioned here from my background, and I'm kind of jumping in and getting into human rights and just kind of explaining a little bit how communism works in China and why it's a unique setting where you could get this kill to order enterprise. So hopefully, I probably want to give you an opportunity to say something now.
No, that's a great setup, and I think the important thing you bring up there is those peaceful principles. I mean, just the thoughtfulness and the sincerity of a simple belief, but having it demonized and marginalized. We've obviously seen that in the last couple of years creep into our system here in America. With a couple boards of medicine, I've gone through scientific struggle sessions and wouldn't admit fault or wouldn't admit, that the COVID narrative was wrong, and they punish you for it. So, I mean, not to any degree of what they're going through over there. I'm not making that comparison. I'm just saying I understand that psychological pressure
What
that
you're
one
saying is important,
feels.
Ryan. If I can jump in, okay?
Please.
Because see, there was a narrative like I didn't like. I said I didn't like, or I was skeptical of big narratives. I was ready to be skeptical of big narratives, even as a biologist, right? But when I joined Epoch Times, it was the only media that would do this. There was this grand narrative, okay, around China.
Hmm.
The grand narrative was that it's liberalizing, okay, and that especially if we put a lot of money in there, it's going to liberalize really well, okay. And of course, we're going to make some good money helping it liberalize. That, of course, goes without saying. Otherwise, the interest wouldn't be as nearly as great. But this was like a 95-5 issue. Like everybody believed it. Everybody, like almost everybody. With some highly skeptical anti-communist that I came across. But it was, I knew from my early work before I was even at the Epoch Times that China was not liberalizing, and I knew this because they were killing people for refusing to give up their faith, their belief, right? And there's a reason why the First Amendment is the First Amendment in our Bill of Rights here in the United States. It's because it's the fundamental right that needs to be protected from government. Okay, it's the freedom of speech, assembly, and conscience at a deeper level, right? It's that faith, your ability to think and believe what you want. No one has a right to demand that, right? But this particular regime was literally killing people for for exercising that. And that cannot be a liberalizing, there's no scenario where that's happening, that's a liberalizing society. It can't be, because they're actually going after the most fundamental right we have, right?
Amen. And I like how you paint the picture in the book of it's not the Chinese people, it's the party that is enforcing this. Because, I mean, a good majority of the people from China I've interacted with are just human beings and wonderful people like the rest of us. But it's this mindset of a dynasty or a particular party, and then, going back to the Kissinger doctrine and having one or two people in government decide that we're going to somehow liberalize a very rigid, dynastic, communist regime. Uh, yeah, it didn't happen, obviously, and here we
On the
are.
surface, it seemed plausible because, we did it with Taiwan, we did it with South Korea. I mean, Japan, in a sense, Japanese it's a unique culture. They have to really
Sure.
see that they're mastered, and then then they just adopt. That's my theory. They adopt all the sort of cultural elements of the culture that's shown itself to be superior in some way, like of course the US did in a tragic sense. In some senses, the Japanese did this in the Tang dynasty with China, when they adopted Chinese architecture, Chinese religion, Chinese, all sorts of stuff, right? Yeah.
And
Anyway,
so,
my point
go.
is just that it was plausible, but we should have looked a bit deeper. And yeah.
And yet here we are, and you've been working with the people there for many years now, and obviously you've seen the atrocities and you've written about the atrocities. Let's focus now on the book. And before we get into the book, I would like you to make an announcement, because you got some really good news this evening before we came online. Tell us about your status on the New York Times bestseller list.
It's absolutely astonishing. Okay, so yes, from what I understand, at 7 p.m. Eastern today, so just a few minutes ago, or yeah, um, New York Times bestseller, number 8, that is debuting. I don't even know how to like say it properly. I guess I'm still kind of stunned. The reason I'm stunned is because when I first started talking to people about this, and I'll explain, hopefully you'll let me explain how this is different than like typical horrible organ trafficking, which happens in many places around the world, unfortunately. But this is a whole different level, right? A
Yeah,
whole different level. Um,
that's where I want to go next. So
when
let's
I was
let's
talking with people about it, they would just clue out, like they would leave the conversation, like, initially I was irritated, and then later I was sympathetic, right? Because I thought to myself, I actually had the same reactions when I first was kind of hit over the head with. I'm the kind of person who needs to be hit over the head with evidence before I start, being like, okay, all right, this must be real, and that's yeah, it's just a very difficult to imagine that this people could do something like this to one another, and the sort of the systematic nature of it, and the scale of it, and so it's been 20 years. I think COVID actually played a role in helping people become wiser. Tragically, perhaps, somewhat through their own experiences, but also through what seeing how China reacted to COVID. They tried to really out totalitarian COVID, right? Like they just welded people into homes, and I mean, it was insane, right? But I think it was very illustrative of the totalitarian mindset, because they truly believe they can only control things into submission. No, like
Mhm.
it's a weird mentality, and that's part of the reason why it's very difficult for them to innovate and create. That's why they have to kind of steal a lot of technology and innovation, or the people who are learned how to do that in a free society, and get them over there to kind of do the R&D and everything else, because it's like a very, very extreme ideology, that very, very top down.
So, and one thing that struck me, the number of people that are in this basically imprisoned system for a belief. I like what you said on stage last week. We can't do horrible things casually. And, or maybe Rob Schneider said that one. One of the two of you said that. And I'm thinking about There's nothing casual about this. Share with the audience the scale of what you're talking about. And again, we're not going to give the whole book away. Don't worry about that. But share with the audience. This was just gut wrenching to me, and I mean, you foundationally go through so much evidence in the book, but share the scale of what's going on.
So you need scale for this system to function at all. And so, as I mentioned, you have this dehumanized large group of people, 70 to 100 million people, and then you have a million or two incarcerated. And then some very evil person who I think I know who it is, and I theorize in the book or hypothesize in the book who that is
Hmm.
and how it happened. I think I make a good case. Thought to themselves, you know, our task is to eradicate Falun Gong. Doesn't matter how we do that, and we can also we're supposed to grow our organ industry, which was kind of functioning at a pretty low level at the time.
Hmm.
Like they were doing it. They were killing people for organs. We even have surgeons who say they did that prior to this massive scaling after the year 2000. But it wasn't a lot, and they were using death row prisoners or something of the like, or because in an ethical system, okay, you have to have a catastrophic accident, right? Let's say you need a heart, okay? There has to be a catastrophic accident, and someone needs to be not coming back. Like an ethics team has to look at this person and say, it's reasonable to transplant from this person because you don't want to transplant from someone that's coming back, right?
Right.
So that's actually a tough ethical decision to make because people sometimes can make it back from pretty severe injuries, right? So the catastrophic accident has to happen. That's rare. And then on top of that, you have to, because our bodies reject or foreign things, including organs that are replacement organs, we have to try to match as close as we can. There are also anti-rejection drugs to help with this, but so you match blood type, you match histology, the sort of the tissue type, and you match the size roughly because it has to kind of fit, right? And so to get all that, it's rare and it's a kind of a scramble. The moment that accident happens, people have a go bag, they rush to the hospital, they get people together ideally, and they can explant and transplant very quickly. In China, okay, one of the whistleblowers, Jakob Levy, had a patient. He was a heart transplant surgeon. He had a patient that organized a transplant for himself or had a transplant organized for him in 2 weeks scheduled. Okay. And this was a massive red flag for you're thinking to yourself for obvious reasons, because one, well, you've scheduled the catastrophic accident, right? In
Right.
other words, you're killing that person on a date at a specific time. And the second part is the 2 weeks. How can you get the 2 weeks? How do you get that match, right? That's why you have to wait a long time. So, well, what they started doing in China is this million or let's say odd people, they started blood typing, tissue typing, and organ scanning them and creating a database. Okay, creating an organ, if you want, a living organ bank, okay, of living people, of prisoners, innocent prisoners of conscience who are known to be particularly healthy.
Hmm.
Okay. And then when that person pays that money, 100 or 200 grand for the heart, they're all that person in the prison system is already pre-matched to them because there's so many of the people, there's enough of them that there will be a kind of a very good match and the rejection likelihood will be low. And then they ship and kill that person to order. And that's the reason the book is called Kill to Order, because, and as you can see, it's a very unique scenario that this could actually be done. But in China, that circumstance exists, and it's an atrocity in my view.
And share the story about say the German gal with the multiple liver transplants. That one was fascinating.
So it also creates the possibility of really horrible behaviors for people that have. I mean, it's horrible enough I think, if you decide it's okay to end someone else's life for an organ. I don't care how desperate you are, right? I know myself well enough. I mean, this people say, well, I might do it, or like, I don't know. I hope you wouldn't.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, I had a really heart-wrenching conversation with Mike Rowe about this on his podcast, where he says, well, if it was my daughter, I might think about it at least, right? I can understand that, but I told him, Mike, I know you well enough now that to say I think you would say no, even though your mind might go there because you want to save the life of someone you love, but you want to live with that, like that. You want that to be your legacy. You want that when you're being judged, you know.
Right.
I know he's a faithful person. So he knows that
And that
that
was a great interview for anybody that wants to go back and listen to that one as well. Yeah, you guys covered the topic exceedingly
You're
well.
Ryan. Where do you find time to look at these things and doctor at the same? I don't. I have no idea how you do everything that you do. It's astonishing.
Uh,
It's truly astonishing. Thank you for watching that. Thank you for reading the book, apparently cover to cover.
yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
so
Um,
what
yes.
this woman did, okay? I mean, it's just really horrifying and troubling, frankly, right? And this is a recent case. I learned about this from a former explant surgeon member of an explant team in Germany, who is aware of a case where a woman had a pretty bad cirrhosis of the liver and she was a heavy drinker. I think she had a unique situation where she got cirrhosis faster than the average person. That's my understanding. And she did that, and and because of this, because of her condition, like it was also kind of impossible for her to get a transplant quickly.
Mhm.
Uh, so she went to China and got it done, and came back and kept drinking hard. And a few years later, she had to get it done again, and she went to China again, a second time, and this happened actually three times at the time that this former explant team member explained to me what had happened. So this woman, actually, it was possible for her to get a rare match scenario three times of a liver while she abused her body in extreme ways. And so this is it's kind of like it takes the horror show to yet another level, but it also explains, it's a piece of evidence, because there's no, one is a piece of evidence, but three, you understand that there's a very evil system at play that allows for something like this to even be possible.
And that's what you do so well at in this book is weaving all of those different pieces of evidence together, like the survivor, the individual who escaped, who had been partially harvested liver and lung. Briefly hit on that aspect.
So I never thought we'd ever see a survivor of this, because it's so easy, like so easy to get rid of the evidence. Like the crime scene is an operating room, right?
Mhm.
And which is scrubbed clean every time, right? And so, like, you're never going to get a photo of forced organ harvesting happening, right? It's
And these
all,
hospitals are near the prisons, and there are a lot of these hospitals right
in
next to the
many cases
prisons.
they are. In many cases they are. In the early years, I mean, the ones that we look at weren't necessarily. They were, but that started happening later on, where they were building absolutely hospitals and prisons side by side, and crematoria. There's one scenario in Xinjiang like that, actually, that Ethan Gutman, and one of the hero researchers. Actually, I'll just mention it because he has a book called The Xinjiang Procedure. My book is a popular book. Okay, it's written for anybody. It's written to understand the issue. It brings together the incredibly hard and committed work of a handful of people, a small number of people who have really gave their lives to this issue. Okay, but Ethan Gutman's one of these people, and he just wrote his second book. His initial book was called The Slaughter, which is worth reading.
Mhm.
It was about the organ harvesting from Falun Gong. One of the horrible realities, right, of this is that no one really did anything about this, even though we already knew, like, there was enough evidence to be very clear that this was happening. Um, for 14 or 15 years between 2000, when they just grew this massive transplant system geometrically, right? By 2014, 2015, they add another group of people. No one did anything, right? So we add the Uyghur people, very
Mhm.
isolated in the northwest of China. The whole area functions like kind of a prison camp in a way. They actually blood type and tissue type people in their homes there, right? Not just in the prisons. And so he's written a new book, came out just shortly before mine, called The Xinjiang Procedure, which is a deep treatment of the evidence around that, how that's, they keep making it harder and harder for us to get the evidence. But Ethan actually went on the ground to a neighboring country to get direct evidence. It was kind of astonishing what he managed to pull off. So I mean, I should be talking about kill to order, but I like to give credit where credit is due, and we're actually, I think it's April 7th. If you happen to be in Washington, D.C., we're going to be on stage together at the Heritage Foundation, talking about forced organ harvesting and our books and so forth. So let me see if I can get you to bring me back now
Sure.
from.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the guy who actually survived and is just
Right,
another
right, right.
puzzle piece in the story of, someone who escaped the system after having some of his organs harvested. And
And
just
it's just so easy to get rid of the evidence, and the evidence being people's bodies, right? Like you don't need to. Why would you let anyone live if you're treating people this way, right? Except that you might want to take another organ from them.
and he escaped, if I remember correctly.
Well, so his situation is very interesting. He's missing. So I'll set it up a little bit. He was, as many Falun Gong practitioners were, incarcerated for his beliefs. He refused to give them up, and it looks like they were using him as an experiment, as these types of regimes have in the past. And so he's actually missing part of his liver and part of his lung. They have as a 14-inch gash in his side. Now it's a scar, obviously, but he woke up one day. They were doing some, and he had been operated on, and he didn't even know what had happened. He didn't imagine he had been organ harvested. Right? This was actually in the early 2000s, but he felt horrible inside, and and like going in and out. It was touch and go, right? And sort of through the process, his story is a little bit like a Holocaust survivors. I know I've interviewed a number of them over the years, my father-in-law in particular, but they all have these stories where they almost met their end in some way, but they made a decision or something just happened that was providential, and they just made it to the next stage. And this happened several times, and at the end, the war is over, or in his case, because he had been so maligned, sort of harmed, the guards actually were just kind of not paying attention. And this has happened actually. A number of Falun Gong practitioners have managed to get out of these prisons and so forth, just because it looks like they're either paralyzed or they're not, or something, but they find the strength to leave and they get out. And in his case, he actually ended up escaping out of China to Thailand, where he hid for a number of years, and then was rescued by Bob Destro, who was the Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Rights, and Labor. It's funny. He was there on Monday with us, and
Oh,
I
cool.
I saw him because he has very, very white hair, and even though I couldn't see people, but I could see the silhouette, I knew it had to be him. He has this kind of look, right? Anyway, and he's another hero of this whole thing. But so we did the scans on him, and yeah, he's missing part of his liver and part of his lung, and he's kind of the living smoking gun evidence. And they even admitted, and this is talking to Bob, he's a professor of law at Catholic University also, and they actually admitted to having done it. They say they did it to save his life, which is not a credible.
Yeah, you spell out the whole story in the book. Yeah, so that one really just struck me. Um, you talked about the geometric growth of the transplant industry, as which is a horrible way to term it, but that's what it's become. We're talking 60 to 90,000 people a year, right?
It's not people, it's transplants.
Transplants. Okay,
And
so one person may be a couple of
And
organs for a couple
especially with
different.
the advent of ECMO, and I think ECMO came online around, maybe this is something you'll know better than me, but I think 2012 off the top of my head. And so ECMO replaces, again, probably a lot of the viewers will be familiar with ECMO, but it replaces your lungs and heart when you need to do serious operations. But it can also be used to keep a body circulating that's had some organs removed. So they bought huge amounts of these ECMO machines this is one of the pieces of evidence for these transplant hospitals. So we think it's probably fewer people than that number, especially since 2012. But the number of hospitals has increased, even though it's harder for us to get the information. So it was when Ethan Gutman made his estimate, which is kind of the core estimate, 60 to 100,000 is the way his estimate runs. He defended it in Congress, I think in 2016, and under oath. there were 146 hospitals that he was using as the estimate, as the number of hospitals to create a rough estimate.
And it's
And now
about $9 billion, right? Is
that's a good
ish.
guess at the
Yeah.
number. So I want to explain why are the boundaries so big? Because of course we don't know exactly. It's all a state secret, right?
Right.
But what I can say is the way that this is calculated, you look at the use of beds, you look at transplant teams. We have like an example of one hospital that we know that delivered 5,000 transplants in a year. So we have like these isolated bits of information that we bring together, and then this big estimate is like a very conservative estimate, assuming that these transplant hospitals are really doing the most minimum amount of transplantation that could be possibly imaginable, while having stood up a whole transplant team, OR, all of that stuff, right? And so the whole bound is actually conservative, 60 to 100,000, 60 to 90,000. In a way, the reason I say 60 to 90,000 and a few other people working in this space is because it just doesn't sound as dramatic as 60 to 100,000,
Right.
but frankly, the reality is it's probably a lot more than that. And
Sure.
that's, we can't know for sure because, they don't give us the data, right? Obviously. Yeah.
And a point I think that needs to be brought up is transplants have saved a lot of people's lives. And if you do it in that ethical manner, and again, there's even controversy here in the US, and we're readdressing how those ethical decisions, end of life transplant, are made. I like in your book tour at the beginning, you said, or somewhere in the talk, you said evil is a degradation of something good. And you talk about the instrumentalization of the individual and just basically the individual as a commodity. And that kind of rolls into how do medical institutions even play a part in this based on the ethics of medicine? And I mean, unfortunately, even ties here to the US in terms of the training of many of these surgeons who then go back and participate in this program. I mean, I know that's kind of a weaving of three thoughts. Sorry about that, but I mean, just the scale of it, taking something good, making it into basically a commodity. How do the institutions rationalize this, or even our U.S. institutions?
So I think that I have a whole chapter in the book that explains how the Chinese Communist Party makes both its own population and us complicit with it. And in fact like a feature of the system to do that, right? Because it makes it easier for you to, not say, hey, stop, or whatever, or not participate, especially, for example, if there's good cash flowing, right? If you're making a lot of money, there's I really have to remember this quote. I'm going to have to memorize it, but from Mark Twain, where he says, if you're financially motivated to not notice something, it's very easy to not notice it,
Right.
basically, right? So I think there's a lot of that going on as well. Um, with these large institutions, some of them have been, totally, bought or compromised by the CCP, like the World Health Organization is, unfortunately, and this, COVID is case in point. They would take the Chinese Communist Party's word for something. Like that's a crazy thing to do. You can't do that because whatever information they give you its purpose isn't to reflect reality or not. Its purpose is to manipulate you. This is this instrumentalization, right? It's very interesting that you brought that up, but it's kind of imagine like a regime, the mentality is the instrumentalization of absolutely everything, whether it's
Mhm.
information, right? Whether it's human bodies, which of course is the central focus of the book, but it's not, I mean, 2/3 of the book is about these other things, right?
Right.
Um, allies. I've been talking about Iran a bit. Iran was this kind of a very powerful tool for communist China to keep, let's say, America's gaze away from it over decades, in fact, right? So they really view everything in this very cold calculus of power, that where human life and like basic dignity, and none of these things matter at all. And the only thing that really matters is the survival and supremacy of the Communist Party, right? Another way of putting it, right, is Stalin said it, right? To make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs, right? And this is where like this is where we kind of get into the bioethics
Right.
spectrum, so to think, like we've seen this rise of utilitarian bioethics in America. They're the extreme of you want to see where utilitarian bioethics ends up, that's where it ends up.
Hmm.
That's the ethics of the greatest good for the greatest number in medicine, right? It's in stark contrast to Hippocratic medicine.
Which is the direction our public health had been going, unfortunately. And those same propagandistic arguments have been slowly creeping into our systems think here in America. Um, why do you think or how do you think they've gotten away with turning the gaze away from the globe? I mean, obviously there's a lot of topsy-turvy things in the world. We all know that. But how do you think they've gotten away with it for so many decades? Or why do you think the world hasn't really glommed onto the concept of the scale of this atrocity? Or-
There's multiple ways, but one of them, and there's I keep promoting other books other than mine here. There's an excellent book by Lee Smith titled "The China Matrix," and he chronicles in the China Matrix how the CCP co-opted our elites. Okay, and a significant part of it is just by taking advantage of partially our gullibility. I see Lee and I argue about this a bit. I think it's more gullibility, but also greed. And he
Mm.
thinks it's more greed, but also gullibility.
Yeah, and then they end up compromising many of our officials, and then we become complicit in the process, and or other governments as well. And they are part of it, but not part of it, but at the same time partially responsible for it, but compromised in. And you lay that out quite well. I mean, we could go into the whole list of 33 pieces of evidence, which I think is fantastic. And if you're making a case in court, this is a solid case to be able to say, look, this is happening, and hey, world, we need to pay attention to it. What do you think the public in general? I mean, I'm ecstatic for you that it's on the bestseller list because people need to know about this. What do you think the public may not be aware of that would kind of awaken them at this point, other than obviously read your book? I know you keep talking about other people's book, but your book is fantastic. But yeah, what do you think the public needs to know at the moment?
I think it's incredibly important, not just for Americans, not just for Canadians, but especially for the Chinese people to understand this is real. And this has been the hardest thing because there was a film called The Island that came out in 2005, just before I realized this was real. Basically, we felt there was enough evidence to be like, oh wow, that they're doing something horrible. I mean, it just really feels like science fiction or something or it's kind of a crime against humanity that's beyond our expectations, beyond what we're willing to even, maybe it makes us feel like we have to be responsible, for it or do something. There's all sorts of reasons, but the Holocaust was also not believed, and people went out. I talk about that a little bit, partially just because it's just so unbelievable, right?
Right.
And so I feel like so many things are aligned right now to help people. The most important thing is, right, this is real. They have a large scale murder for organs from prisoners of conscience, from innocent people industry that just kills people at large scale all as we speak,
Right.
right? And just churning along, doing its thing. And we're like partnered with this. And we don't, at the very least, we could enter, as you mentioned, that we train some of the surgeons. We have all these financial partnerships. We supply some of the technologies like ECMO, I mentioned, and also like materials, solutions, all sorts of stuff, right?
Depression
Very,
drugs, all
we
those
should,
things. Yeah.
we shouldn't do that. Like,
Right.
that's a starting point. But I think even more importantly, we just haven't understood who we're dealing with.
Hmm.
Right? We're dealing with a regime that does this, and it's a feature, not a bug.
Right.
It's what
That's
will
that's
happen.
such an important point. Yeah, it is a feature. And the other thing that comes to mind, and you touch on this as well, is in many countries we have now this slippery slope of the say in Canada, the medical assistance in dying, or in the Netherlands. And now the question becomes, okay, upcoming in 2027, you can schedule your assistance in dying if you're depressed. And now the question becomes, well, okay, I'm depressed, but maybe my organs can do something good. And so now we're getting into these ethical conundrums of, wait a minute, it's not just China where this could happen. This could, if we don't stick with the core principle of Hippocratic medicine and medical ethics, this could be a bad slippery slope in many places.
100%. And I'm very worried about Canada because Canada has a kind of an unusual setup that I'll explain how these pieces fit together. But on the one hand, um, it, the media in Canada are very dependent on the government. They're
Hmm.
dependent on financial support from the government. And so that creates a perverse incentive structure. Okay. Number two, the medical system in Canada is in unbelievably rough shape. The wait times for various, basic procedures are through off the charts.
Sure.
That's number two. Number three, they have this unique euthanasia arrangement where it's actually a billing code. It's like doctors can offer euthanasia, what they call MAID. It's kind of euphemistic. I prefer not to
Yeah.
use it, but they offer euthanasia as a treatment. In other words, like you could take, I mean, not Tylenol, but I could give you this operation, or I could give you these drugs, or I could give you death. And that's and doctors do it. And that's in this situation where it becomes a billing code. It's only also in the other country is Netherlands where they do this. It really grows very fast. It just becomes like again, so you can see how the media is dependent on the government. The medical system is strained and is in the process of collapsing. Actually, economically, Canada is doing, unfortunately, not doing very well. All of this sort of points to this situation where there's a lot of incentives pointing towards not having a large elderly population that needs the medical system, right? And the moment that let's say the system starts propagandizing around this, because it sounds compelling, right? It's like you're older, your kids aren't around very much. Maybe they pay for you to be in your home, your elder home, but they're not coming around much. You kind of feel like a bit of a burden on them. Maybe you're depressed, and maybe someone could use organs. I mean, like, why not off yourself and everybody wins, right? Like you can imagine people being propagandized this way, right? And for some reason, like, there's also people who are in this MAID industry. I've learned just from a number of case examples, right? I know people in Canada who work on this specifically, somehow are very excited about getting people to do it in many cases. So it's like it's just a I just think this could go down a very dark road very fast if we're not careful.
So what can we do here in the US? I know we're talking about dark things, and you lay out the story quite well. You lay out the evidence, you lay out the ethical conundra, the geopolitical implications. But here in America, how can we help save these people of conscience? I mean, many of us were prisoners of conscience for several years here. How do we again, and you've done yeoman's work on dedicating, like you said, there are no atheists in a foxhole, basically, and making that promise, I will do good with my life, and in a beautiful way you have. What can we do? I mean, as physicians, obviously we're trying to continue to get back to the core of medicine, but the citizens, what can they do to get involved? All those people that will listen to this, give us some action steps so we can help.
Well, so I also say that I have an appendix in the book dedicated to this, and of course I write about this in various ways in the book. But I have an appendix to make it easy. One
Yep.
or two pages that basically,
Yep.
whether you're grassroots, whether you're at the state level, trying to get legislation acted, whether you're at the federal level, there's astonishing activity at all levels around this issue. So there's a way to get involved. Okay, I'll say that. I don't know. You'll have to tell me how much time we have left, because I could tell you a lot of different things,
You know,
but
for you, Jan, we're always happy to go over. So we can, as many minutes as you want to talk, because this is such an important topic, and there are lives that can be saved here. So please keep
well,
going.
so I'll summarize, okay? At the federal level, there's two pieces of federal legislation that will put a dent in this, that have passed the House near unanimously and are now in the Senate, or now need to be passed in the Senate. And one just 5 days ago achieved bipartisan status. Senators Cruz and
Hmm.
Merkley. It's called the Falun Gong and Victims of Forced Organ Harvesting Protection Act. Very simple piece of legislation, not expensive. If it gets to the floor, it gets voted on. I don't think anyone's voting against it. It sanctions people that are involved in this. It asks whether it's an atrocity. From a legal perspective, it would be very powerful to have it established in law that this is an atrocity. And of course, they will find it is. It's a really extreme thing, right? So anyway, just like there's another, the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act is a second bill, which is a bit broader around organ harvesting in general in the world, but with a focus on China as a unique, kind of bad actor in the space. Also, excellent piece of legislation. Both should be passed, I think. Again, if they get to the floor, they're getting passed, I think. And so, it's amazing at the grassroots level. It's amazing what 100 phone calls to a senator's office can do. Like, people, those offices listen when people start getting excited about it. That's why I'm so excited that this book is number 8 on the New York Times bestseller list this week, because that will I hope it will get more media attention, more attention on this issue. And and at the state level, there's 6 states out of 40. There's still 44 states to go that have enacted legislation that just says no Medicaid, no Medicare, no insurance payments for China transplants. And that's good legislation. Every state should pass that, right? So that you can get involved at every level. There's even like a Rotary Club, a satellite Rotary Club, okay, that they created. The Rotarians, I loved working with Rotarians when I was running international youth programs as part of my service, okay, and very also incredibly service-oriented people in general. But they created a satellite club to focus explicitly on ending forced organ harvesting. It's astonishing, and so I'm actually a newly minted Rotarian now,
Congrats. That's great.
because I want to help them, participate in this. They're excited about the book. They're using it. I don't know exactly how, but they're going to probably be happy to hear about the bestseller status too. My point is, you can get involved even if you're not this big activist that is ready to do stuff. It's very easy in America to join a Rotary Club and get involved in this satellite and forced organ harvesting club. So, but there's one more thing that I'll mention, and I think this is maybe even the most important thing. The State Department has a new initiative, right? Freedom.gov. It's this, kind of free speech oriented initiative. And, something that we do, I don't know how many people, if everybody knows this, but our Chinese language operation makes a point of breaking through the Great Firewall of China and allowing the Chinese people free information. It's a fairly small operation because it's all a question of money, okay? But basically, like, you can break through this thing, but every time you drill that hole, so to speak, in it, that costs a little bit, right? We get some millions of people monthly that are able to hop the firewall to look at us, and also anything they want to, actually. But if we can break through, this effort, freedom of speech effort, that this administration has, could be unbelievably powerful, because I think for the Chinese people, aside from the super elites that have unlimited access to these organs, that's one of the crazy things. That's what makes it hard to end, because it's not just $9 billion a year, right? It's unlimited access to organs on demand, right? If you're a super elite. But for most people in China, the vast, vast, vast majority, they don't have access to that at all. And it's kind of in the realm of this rumor, right? The thing, like, people in prisons, they'll tell you, be good or we're going to force organ harvest you and stuff like that. But it's all this, like, it's all in this kind of weird space where you think it definitely could be true. The CCP is that cruel, but is it really true? I don't know. But to actually have the Chinese people understand this is real, right, would be unbelievably powerful, I think,
Exactly.
because
Exactly.
it will help. See, this is the problem with these totalitarian regimes. They're very good at propaganda, very good at selling themselves as being all powerful and bigger. China's not a peer competitor to the United States. This is one of the big pieces of propaganda they have. They're powerful. They're more powerful than most nations in the world, but they sell themselves as being way more powerful and way more effective and all of that. And they show all this, misinformation, disinformation. They're expert at all this stuff, right? And we kind of believe weird things like it can't collapse. I mean, they're very good at connecting our economy with theirs. And so if they
Sure.
do have trouble, we have trouble, and that was part of their strategy. That's true. But do we really want to be like, why don't we collaborate with a regime that doesn't do this? Why don't we work with a free China? That would be better, right? And it's only the Chinese people that can make those decisions for themselves. But I think knowing that this regime practices this at large scale on the backs of their own people, it would be very valuable for them to know about, and as they make decisions about who should run this country.
And I think it's such a good reminder just to the heart of humanity for people to realize, we live these semi-sheltered lives in relatively free countries. We've seen some of the slippery slope stuff try to happen and we've resisted. But at the same time, recognizing that there's a part of this world where this exists on a daily basis. And I love that you spell out in the appendix of the book how we can be involved. And yeah, you don't have to be an onstage activist with a bullhorn doing this, that, and that. But everybody doing a little bit, I think, can shift this tide
It will shift it. This is an issue where awareness changes things. It's astonishing. I mean, that's maybe, if there is a silver lining in this,
yeah.
it's that.
Yeah. The book is amazing. Please read it if you haven't, folks. Where else can people follow your work, Jan? For those, I know most of our audience members know you well, but for those who don't, where else can they follow what you do?
Well, I would encourage you to get the book. Let's keep this bestseller status going if we can, right?
Yes.
Buildtoorder.com. That's the short link to the Amazon link. We're also selling assigned copies in the Epoch shop. You could do that if you wanted to. I'm like, for me, it's like whatever is easiest, do that thing, right? It's
Wonderful.
not, we're not like, I'm not going to be, I'm, donating the proceeds that may come from this book to Epoch Times from their marketing. This is a life, project for me in a way. And
And
so
and it's an
that's why I
easy
want everyone.
read. It's an easy read. You write it as a story. You've got that gift as a storyteller. And so for those, that are readers like I am, it's an easy read. And I mean, it's the subject matter isn't easy, don't get me wrong, but the way it reads, you're like, oh, and you tell the story and weave the history and weave everything together so well. All right, I see Autumn's popping on my screen. That means she has some questions from our amazing audience. So if you don't mind, would you take a few questions from the audience, Jan?
No, let's do that. That would be great.
Okay, wonderful.
All right, I'm going to keep it real brief. We have a ton of questions, but I'll keep it real brief just because we're going over. Laura Chamberlain asked, Jan, how much do organ transplants cost in China?
It's a huge range, and this is also over the years because there's been probably inflation, right? But it's anywhere between, we've seen them sold for anywhere from $30 to $300,000 US,
Wow.
even translated from other currencies. Yeah.
Wow.
Lisette asked, my partner has arteries from pigs. What about organs? Are people using organs from animals on people?
That technology is not ready yet, and part of the issue is rejection. It's theoretically possible, but it's a very distant. It's hard enough to transplant a human organ that's going to stick. Like I was actually on a plane with a guy just now who's, I think it was his brother. Had to get 2 liver transplants. The first one was ostensibly a good match, but it got rejected. So he managed to be able to get a second one. But the technology isn't there. There is a new type of technology. It's called BMI GenBank. BMI GenBank. I think that's right. And it's basically like it's a box that will perfuse an organ at room temperature for 2 days. Kidneys they've started with. I think they're actually an FDA sort of partner because they've done such good work ostensibly. So on the one hand, through this box that can perfuse a kidney basically without any degradation for 2 days, that hasn't existed for like before, and it'll save a bunch of lives. But on the other hand, you might be able to get these organs shipped now from China. So that there's always this kind of
two-edged sword.
Yeah. Another question that was asked in the chat is, do people know in advance that they, like in China, that they are being prepared for organ harvesting, or do some people, are they unaware?
So certainly people that have access to Western media, right? Like the people who take, in order, the millions of people read the Epoch Times, okay, from China every month. And so those people will know, obviously, because we've covered this issue. We're one of the few. Some people, I think for a lot of people, maybe even people watching today, this is still was in the realm of rumor until today. I don't know. But like, I think for most Chinese, it is in the realm of rumor, but just something that the regime might do. And it's kind of like this boogeyman type thing.
Well, we have a lot more questions, but since we're already over, Dr. Cole, I'll pass the mic back to you.
Okay, thank you, Autumn. Jan, I can't thank you enough for joining me tonight. Again, I'm not Mike Rowe, I'm not Rob Schneider, but I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Super congratulations to you on this. I know it's taken decades of research and work, and congratulations on just being the amazing humanitarian you are and bringing the truth to people. And thank you for all you do. Closing thought from you, and then I'll wrap it up here.
Well, my closing thought is, if people are motivated to ask some questions, I can't do it today because I have to do an interview for American Thought Leaders shortly. So I have to sign off, but I would love to do that. Like if you have collected them and maybe we can get people back, maybe we could do like one of these X spaces. I don't know if people still do that. I haven't done it in ages. But maybe we could put that together, bring a few big accounts on with us to drive people in.
That's a great idea. Yeah,
I would be honored and love to do that. I don't want to leave people hanging because IMA honestly is one of my favorite organizations. Like I'm not someone who needs a ton of medical attention. I don't use the system much. But if I was going to use a system, it would be with an IMA doctor. Let me tell you, 100% chance, right?
Fantastic.
Because you guys are trustworthy. You've earned it. You are the true Hippocratic doctors. There's not the only organization, but it's the organization that I trust the most myself. So anyway, I would love to have everyone that's listening have a chance to have their question answers. Let's figure out how to set that up.
Yeah, we'll do that. Let's do an X space. That's part of what we're trying to do on a more regular basis at IMA as well. We've gotten that request, and I think that's probably a very good kickoff one to keep this book
Most definitely.
Again, thank you, Jan. Thanks for joining us. Here at the IMA, as you mentioned, we focus on transparency, on ethics, on patient-centered care. Conversations like this one we've had tonight is part of our mission, and thank you for everything you're doing. And those who are joining us for the first time,
Ryan, let me jump in. Dr. Joe Barron wrote the foreword to the book. That's important.
Yes, he did. Yes, our president of the IMA did write the foreword to the book. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to say it.
Yeah, he did, and it's an excellent foreword to the book. So please join us on future webinars, folks. Can't bring you superstars every time like Jan, but we're just so grateful to have him on tonight. You can follow us at imahealth.org/weekly webinars. Jan, go do your other interview, and I'm going to pass it back to Autumn for closing announcements. Thanks for sticking with us, everybody, for a few minutes over, and best of luck and continued success on everything, Jan, and we look forward to seeing you soon at the IMA conference.
I'm excited to be there. Can't wait for those conversations. Thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jan.
All right. All me. All right. All right. Written by IMA co-founder, president, and chief medical officer, Dr. Joseph Farone. This guide explores the medical, legal, and ethical realities of organ donation and brain death. It gives families a deeper understanding of how the transplant system works, why brain death remains controversial, and why transparency is essential when making these life-altering decisions. You can download this guide at the link on screen or scan the QR code that's available right there. And the short link is geni.us/organ donation guide. Join us next month, April 17th through 18th, for the Medical Education Conference, Emerging Trends in Medicine, a 2-day event exploring the latest innovations, research, and forward-thinking practices shaping the future of healthcare. The entire conference agenda has been approved for continuing medical education credits, and attendees can earn up to 12.75 CME credits. With expert-led lectures, timely discussions, and meaningful networking opportunities, this conference is designed for healthcare professionals who want to stay informed, engaged with emerging trends in medicine. And as they mentioned, Jan Jekielek will also be speaking at our conference, adding to the strong lineup of voices addressing critical issues in medicine and public discourse. You can get your tickets today at imahealth.org/conference. Right now, every dollar you give will be doubled up to $250,000. IMA is building the Parents First Project, a free searchable childhood health resource created by independent pediatric experts to give families clear, evidence-based guidance that they can trust. If you believe families deserve better information and real support, now is the time. You can donate at imahealth.org/parents. All right, before we go, we're excited to share that tomorrow, Thursday, March 26th, we will officially launch the latest edition of the Journal of Independent Medicine. This journal represents something we believe deeply: rigorous and independent science, free from institutional pressures and grounded in real clinical experience. We're proud of the work behind it and even more excited to bring it to all of you. Please take a quick listen from our co-founder, Dr. Joseph Farone, and Matt Halma, Director of Scientific Research here at IMA. Thank you all so much for being here, and good night.
Hi, I'm Dr. Joseph Farone. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Independent Medicine. And I am here today with Matt Halma, assistant editor of the journal, and we are proud to release our new issue of the journal. As you guys know, last year we had 4 issues. Now this is the second issue of the journal. We're going to have 6 issues this journal. I'm very excited about this new issue that we're releasing. We have a couple of editorials. One is by Dr. Elizabeth Mumper. The other one is by myself. We talk about a lot of really interesting things in medicine. We have a couple of great case reports. We have images in clinical imaging. We have 3 review articles, an original investigation of a huge retrospective analysis of a pulmonary condition. We have a couple of basic case reports, and even letters to the editor. So I encourage all of you to read the papers. These are amazing papers. And more importantly, I would like to invite you to contribute to this journal, to this unbiased journal, a journal that is not bought by Big Pharma or any other corporation, where you can send us your clinical and scientific data. And both Matt and myself will make sure that this goes through a proper peer review. And if your data is solid, we'll be delighted to publish it. Just go to the Journal of Independent Medicine.org, and we will be happy to take your submissions.
And the 2 special issues are on repurposed drugs for chronic illnesses. And a very important topic now is treating post-vaccine complications. So we are soliciting submissions for those in addition to our regular issues.
So we look forward to receiving your submissions, guys.